Welcome to day 198 on the trail. We have three readings for today from Mark chapter 4 verse 26 through 5:20, 2 Samuel 14 verses 1 through 24, and 3 Maccabees chapter 2 verses 25 through 33. In our reading from 2 Samuel, David's son Absalom has lived in exile in Geshur with the son of his maternal grandfather following the murder of his brother Amnon, who raped Absalom's sister, Tamar. Now 3 years have passed. Amnon has died, and David begins to long for Absalom. Also, it appears that the people of Israel want Absalom to return. So David's general Joab sends for a wise woman from Tekoa to come and convince David to allow Absalom to return. However, more seems to be going on here than David's reconciliation with his son. From 2 Samuel chapter 14, beginning in verse 2, Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. He said to her, "Pretend to be a mourner. Put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning for many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak to him as follows." And Joab put the words into her mouth. At first, it appears that Joab sends the woman from Tekoa to help convince David to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem. However, it is more likely that Joab is attempting to deceive David to secure the return of Absalom. The motives of Joab are unclear at this point in the story. However, it appears that Joab is arranging this encounter to trap David. In her presentation to the king, the woman stresses that she is a widow, and her surviving son is now her only means of support. Also, his death, even for killing his brother, would rob her dead husband of his sole remaining heir. Now, after David offers protection for her living son, the Tekoite woman suggests that since the king has given protection to her son, he should also provide the same or similar protection for his own son, Absalom. Overall, it seems that the point of this story is to show that the return of Absalom was due to Joab's scheming, and that David was deceived by a cunning trick and trapped by his own oath, given in good faith. Yet, as this episode comes to a close, David remains reluctant to overlook Absalom's crimes. In our reading from the New Testament, we find the exorcism of a demoniac living across the Sea of Galilee. Now, in the previous story in Mark, Jesus rescued the disciples in the midst of a dramatic storm on the Sea of Galilee by rebuking the winds and the waves with the words, "Be still, remain quiet." Now, the language that Jesus uses here is similar to those used when he rebukes evil spirits, as in chapter 1, verse 25, which reads, "Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, 'What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God.' But Jesus rebuked him, saying, 'Be silent and come out of him.'" Therefore, we find a direct connection between Jesus' power over nature in the calming of the sea and Jesus' authority over the supernatural realm when he rebukes demons with similar language. After crossing the sea, Mark records that Jesus and his disciples have arrived in the region of the Gerasenes. Gerasa, the site of the modern city of Jerash, was one of the prominent cities of the Decapolis. However, Gerasa was located approximately 30 miles from the sea, a 2-day journey. And in Mark chapter 5, we are told that immediately after arriving, Jesus is met by a man who is possessed. Also, when the demons enter the swine, they rush down a steep bank into the sea. And when the swineherds rush into the city to report what has happened, the people respond by going out to see Jesus for themselves. It seems then that the city is nearby. Therefore, the actual site of this encounter may not have been the city of Gerasa. Matthew says that these events happened at a different city of the Decapolis named Gadara. This is closer to the sea, but still about 5 miles away. Therefore, we cannot be certain of the exact location of this encounter. Unique to Mark's account is the description of the condition of the man. Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 3. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. Due to his condition, this man made his home among the tombs, ostracized from society. The man's incredible strength, his tormented mind, and his self-destructive behavior all point to the supernatural forces which are present within him. Now, we do not know for certain if this man was Jewish or a Gentile, but he is defiling himself by living in a graveyard and near a herd of swine which were considered unclean by Jewish law. Also, given the proximity to the herd of swine mentioned earlier in the story, Mark may be making reference to Isaiah chapter 65, verses 3 and 4, where God is addressing Israel. There in Isaiah 65, it reads, "A people who provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens and offering incense on bricks, who sit inside tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat swine's flesh with broth of abominable things in their vessels." Despite the supernatural power of the demons, when they are confronted by the presence of Jesus, they quickly run to Jesus and fall down before him, begging not to be tormented by the Son of God. The authority and identity of Jesus is immediately recognized by them. Rather than being expelled from their country, they ask Jesus to banish them into the herd of swine. Now, we may wonder how many demons might compose a legion. A legion is a military term which designates a brigade in the Roman army, numbering around 6,000. This may explain why the legion who possesses the man can take control of an entire herd of 2,000 swine. Now, some commenters have questioned why Jesus would allow the herd of swine to be destroyed. However, this detail is not central to the purpose of the story in Mark. Given the presence of a legion of demons, living among the tombs, and near unclean animals, the emphasis seems to focus on becoming cleansed from impurity. The destruction of the herd of swine appears to be an extension of the man's healing. The unclean spirits were banished into unclean animals, which were drowned in water, which itself suggests a form of cleansing. In a way, the story of the deliverance of this one man becomes symbolic of the deliverance of the land of the Gentiles. When the people living in the town witness the power of Jesus to cast out demons and the destruction of the swine, they are frightened and ask Jesus to leave the region. Beginning in verse 15. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. Before Jesus gets into the boat to leave, the formerly possessed man asks to follow Jesus. Instead of granting his request, Jesus sends him home to share his story of God's mercy and graciousness. And the man faithfully obeys Jesus. But he does not just tell his story in his hometown, but travels throughout the entire Decapolis, telling everyone how Jesus had rescued him. And those who heard him were amazed. Although he was not allowed to accompany Jesus with the disciples, he becomes part of Jesus' mission to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the Gentiles. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.